Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely crucial to how our entire world operates. We are tracking the evolution of sovereignty and state power. We're going to look at how the whole concept of the nation-state actually kicked off, the wild ways it asserts control over us, and how modern thinkers predict it might literally collapse in the digital age. It's a huge, fascinating puzzle connecting our messy history to the future of human freedom. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. Birth of the nation-state. 2. Corporate empires and borders. 3. Modern national divides. 4. State power over life. And 5. The sovereign individual.
Starting right off with Section 1, Birth of the Nation-State, Forging the Republic. So, to really grasp state sovereignty, we've got to look at how modern borders were violently hammered out. It's basically a story of a distant king pushing way too far. Trace the history here. You've got the Stamp Act in 1765, the Tea Act, the Intolerable Acts, all boiling over into the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The British Parliament tried to force its sovereign will across an entire ocean. And well, it was exactly that legislative overreach that sparked the American Revolution and birthed a totally new republic. And honestly, just think about what the United Colonies were up against. On one side, you have this scrappy, nascent nation, later getting a hand from France. On the other side, the Kingdom of Great Britain, its massive army, the legendary Royal Navy, and various European allies. Talk about an asymmetrical challenge. You literally have a fledgling state trying to violently rip its sovereignty away from one of the most entrenched, powerful global empires in human history.
Which brings us to Section 2, Corporate Empires and Borders, the Sovereign Proxy.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how empires historically outsourced their power. Enter the Hudson's Bay Company. They were basically a sovereign proxy for the British Crown. Get this, they acted so much like an independent state that in 1741, when actual Royal Navy ships showed up at their fort looking for a place to winter, the company fired a warning volley right at them. No way, right? Their proprietary impulse was just that intense. They held huge trade monopolies in the Northwest Territories until the British government, terrified of American expansion, basically forced them to surrender their territorial rights to Canada in 1870 for £300,000.
But, state power isn't just about drawing lines on a map. It's about controlling people. Even after America won its independence, that British royalist superiority complex didn't just vanish. The Crown held onto this idea of indelible allegiance, totally ignoring the very concept of American citizenship. Out on the water, they forcibly impressed, meaning kidnapped and forced into military service, over 6,000 U.S. citizens into the Royal Navy by 1807. This blatant disregard for the new republic's sovereignty over its own people, that historical hostility directly fueled the War of 1812.
All right, moving on to Section 3, Modern National Divides, Nationalism and Friction.
Fast forward to today, and that historical friction between neighbors is still very much alive. Check out the rhetoric on modern protest signs, reading things like "Buy Canadian instead" and "Elbows up Canada." These aren't just polite disagreements. They're stark expressions of modern cross-border friction, showing exactly how trade wars, tariffs, and aggressive media rhetoric inflame the public and harden that psychological border in the minds of everyday people.
And the data on this is wild. 80% of Americans have a favorable view of Canada, but Canadians? Only 33% feel the same way about the U.S. In fact, 58% of Canadians straight up do not believe the U.S. is a reliable ally anymore. A lot of this massive plunge is driven by recent trade hostilities and the Trump effect, provocative political rhetoric that deeply alienated the Canadian public and echoed some of that old anti-American sentiment.
To put that into perspective, nearly 69% of Canadians actually believe their country should approach the U.S. with extreme caution or even treat it as a potential threat. Let that sink in. This isn't just friendly cultural teasing anymore. It has morphed into genuine security and economic anxiety. It perfectly reinforces the immense psychological power of the modern border.
So, how does a state maintain that kind of intense loyalty and superiority? Well, there's this brilliant quote from the book The Network State. The author notes, "The red statist is a secular nationalist. They don't have a god, but they do believe in the state. It's Top Gun America." Basically, modern nationalism acts as a secular religion. It's a loyalty fed by media tropes, blockbuster movies glorifying state institutions and military might. It justifies whatever the state wants to do. Let's move to Section 4, State Power over Life, Managing Mortality. This idea of absolute state superiority over the individual
takes us to some very dark places when it comes to managing human biology. We have to look objectively at the historical extreme of this concept. Aktion T4 was a covert program initiated by Nazi Germany in 1939. Under this policy, the state centralized the medical murder of 70,000 to 100,000 of its own disabled citizens. The bureaucracy literally categorized these people as useless eaters. It was a horrific extreme of state-mandated eugenics that targeted family members and eventually birthed the infrastructure for the Holocaust.
To really wrap your head around the bureaucratic scale of that state control over biology, look at this number, 400,000. Between 1933 and 1939, before the industrialized murders even began, 400,000 German citizens were forcibly sterilized under aggressive state eugenics laws meant to control the population's gene pool.
Let's move to our next point and see how this builds into modern bureaucratic realities. Today, we're looking at a totally different, contemporary data point for how a state administers end-of-life care. MAID, which stands for Medical Assistance in Dying, a legalized health service in Canada. Now, we are strictly looking at the statistical and classification realities here, but it's crucial to understand how a modern state manages mortality data.
The sheer scale of this program is significant. According to Health Canada's 6th annual report, MAID now accounts for 5.1% of all deaths nationwide. That is over 16,400 people in a single year whose deaths were actively administered through this state medical framework.
And this scale has triggered a massive bureaucratic debate about how the state actually classifies death. On one side, government data and the World Health Organization standard code the death to the underlying medical condition. Since 63% of MAID recipients have terminal cancer, their official cause of death is recorded as cancer. But public critics argue that since this is an active medical intervention ending life, it should be categorized independently. If they did that, it would literally rank firmly as a top 5 cause of mortality in the country. It highlights the immense defining power the state holds over life and death itself.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the sovereign individual, the end of the nation-state.
So, what does this all mean for the future? Listen to this powerful excerpt from the book, The Sovereign Individual. It says, instead of relating to a powerful state as citizens to be taxed, the sovereign individuals of the 21st century will be customers of governments. The core theory here is that the information age is going to completely denationalize us. That 20th century concept of being a captive citizen to a single state, it might become totally obsolete.
Think about it. The entire ideological and economic grip of the modern nation-state rests on a specific mega-political foundation. 20th century states basically regulated life by laying punitive taxes on the wealthy to subsidize the poor and fund state operations. But today, wealth is digital, and borders are highly permeable to information and capital. Postmodern individuals are figuring out how to bypass this compulsory taxation framework altogether.
But make no mistake, the book warns this transition's going to be messy. There's a fascinating double standard. A monarch, like the Queen, enjoys absolute sovereignty by ancient custom and nobody questions it. But when everyday postmodern people use technology to invent their own sovereignty, it's going to spark intense moral outrage. Because society is so heavily inculcated with 20th century civic myths, the rise of the sovereign individual is predicted to cause a massive, self-righteous neo-Luddite backlash rooted in envy and a nostalgia for state compulsion.
So the crucial point is this. The massive structures of sovereignty we've explored are shifting right under our feet. Physical borders are blurring into psychological nationalism fueled by media. The state's ultimate authority over human life is vast, but increasingly contested. And most importantly, rapidly advancing technology is finally allowing individuals to transcend the role of a subject, stepping into the role of a customer, shopping for governance.
So I have to ask you, are we witnessing the final days of the nation-state as we know it? Or is it simply evolving into a new form of control? It's a profound shift in human history, and I really hope this explainer has given you the context to see these changes unfolding around us. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.